Have you ever wondered how to build a life and a career that you absolutely love? My guest today, Larry Zetterlind, has done just that, and in this episode, he tells us how. His life is a shining example of a life well lived and well loved, and I think you'll be inspired by his story and his advice. So please stay tuned for today's interview. Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Yasmine Ali, cardiologist and best-selling author, and this is my podcast, Positive Vibes on the Sunny Side. Each episode, my goal is to bring you uplifting stories and insights to inspire you to live your happiest, healthiest, most positive life. So thank you for joining me. Hey there, just a quick reminder, if you would like your own free ebook, A Guide to Positive Living, be sure to subscribe for free to my Positive Vibes monthly e-magazine. You can do so on my website, www.yasminealimd.com. That's YASMINEALIMD.com. Or just click on the link in the show notes for this episode of the podcast. When you subscribe to the e-magazine, you'll get an email message to download your free ebook. So be sure to check your spam box. And as a Positive Vibes email subscriber, you'll be the first to learn about special giveaways and discounts on current and future Positive Vibes offerings. Hello again. Today I'm delighted to be speaking with Larry Zetterlind, who is an active member of the Positive Vibes community. Larry grew up in Warren, Pennsylvania, nestled on the edge of the Allegheny National Forest and Allegheny River, and caught the flying bug early, taking his first flying lessons at just 12 years old. He earned his private pilot's license while still in high school, then went on to study aeronautical maintenance engineering at Parks College in Illinois, where he also earned his commercial pilot and flight instructor certificates at the age of 18. He also acquired his multi-engine, instrument, and seaplane ratings while attending college. After college, Larry served in the U.S. Air Force as a helicopter mechanic and later flight engineer/winch operator on Sikorsky CH-3s, with postings in Tucson, Korea, and Thailand. Back in civilian life and shortly after the blizzard of 1978, he joined Aero, that's A-R-O, Corporation, as a co-pilot mechanic, rising to captain on turboprops and eventually the Learjet, a chapter that spanned 19 rewarding years. He then capped his aviation career with 21 years as chief pilot for Hartzell Propeller, where he flew for the company's owners and employees until his retirement. Throughout it all, Larry has been a devoted husband and father, and when he wasn't in the cockpit, you'd likely find him on a hiking trail, biking path, or hunched over a model railroad layout. Today, he and his wife enjoy retirement in the home they built together in Piqua, Ohio. Now, I first connected with Larry due to his keen interest in trains, railroads, and train watching. He read my first book, Walk Through Fire, The Train Disaster That Changed America, and all Positive Vibes listeners know now about that book. If you're new to the podcast, though, or new to Positive Vibes, please have a look at the very first episode of this podcast, and you'll learn all about it and why it's such a keystone for positive vibes. And I will put all those links both to the episode and to the book in the show notes. But anyway, Larry read that book and wrote to me and became a very active and supportive member of the Positive Vibes community, subscribing to the newsletter and e-magazine, and that will be linked to in the show notes as well. And we've just kept in touch. As I learned more about Larry, it occurred to me that given all of his positivity, his hobbies and interests, and his amazing career doing something he truly loved, that he would make a terrific guest for the Positive Vibes podcast. And I'm grateful that he accepted my invitation. So, Larry, welcome to Positive Vibes.
Well, thank you very much, Yasmine. It's nice to talk to you in person.
It's wonderful to have you on, Larry, and it's been a real treat just getting to know you. So thank you for that as well. Now, first of all, you know I love talking with folks on this show about how they found their dream careers, and yours seems to have been in flying aircraft. Can you tell listeners how you first got into it at such a very young age?
Sure, I can. Well, when I was very little, I liked airplanes and trains. Uh, of course, the trains were close by. The airplanes were a little further away. But then again, when I was very young, my mother took me, and I don't remember, but I have pictures of me as a baby of her taking me on United DC-3s and DC-4s, probably to visit her brother and stuff in Philadelphia and things like that. So uh, as I grew through elementary school, I think probably when I was about 8 or 9 years old, uh, there was a flying breakfast at our town at the airport. The flying breakfast is usually an airport or Kiwanis or something. They'll set up a Saturday or Sunday to have a flying breakfast, and they'll serve pancakes. The idea is to get the public to come out to the airport and also get people to fly in their airplanes. And I think my dad paid for a ride, and he and I went in a small plane and that was the first time I think I went in a small plane. And as I looked down at the beauty of the Allegheny National Forest and the rivers and everything, and I liked geography anyway, even as a young child, maps, I thought, man, I think this is what I want to do. And that's kind of what got me started. And then I wasn't the brightest kid around. So about seventh grade, my dad came to me and said, don't tell your mom, but if you do good enough in school this year, luckily he didn't set what the bar was, but he said, if you do good enough in school this year, I'll pay for a half an hour flying lesson a week next summer to see if you really like airplanes or not.
Wow.
And of course, see, you can learn to fly when you're pretty young because there's dual controls in airplanes. It's not like a car. So the instructor's really there and the licensed person. So I took a half hour flying lesson a week that summer, and I fell in love with it. And I think it was smart on my parents' part too, because I wasn't a great reader before that, but now all of a sudden I'm reading books about aeronautics and aviation and weather and all this stuff and all the rules, and I'm sure that helped my comprehension and all kinds of other things. So that's how I got started. And just
That's amazing, Larry. This is a dream come true story.
yes, it was.
Yeah. So what did you do after you got your pilot's license? And you got it in high school, right?
Right. Well, so I could start flying when I was 12, but you can't solo an airplane in the US, a powered airplane, until you're 16.
Mhm.
So most people in those days would solo in, say, 6 to 10 hours of flying time. Well, I had about 30 hours by the time I got to 16, just because of the time. And so I soloed on my 16th birthday, so I got my
Yay.
solo student pilot license, several days before I got my driver's license. So,
That's amazing.
and then you had to be 17 years old in the US to get a private pilot's license. I was naive enough to think I wrote the FAA to see if I could get a waiver on that to get it sooner, but of course they just ignored the letter. But so shortly after I turned 17, I was a senior in high school. I got my private pilot's license.
Okay. Okay. And then what did you do with that? What did you do with your private pilot's license?
Well, it was great right then because, of course, I had a lot of friends that wanted to go flying with me, and so we would go out flying and and exploring the northwestern Pennsylvania, western New York. Niagara Falls was only about 90 miles away if you went straight across the corner of
Oh,
Lake Erie. So there was a
oh
lot
my.
of neat places you could go just in an hour and a half or so and go sightseeing. So that's what I of course, I wanted to build flying time because the next step would be a commercial. And I'd already decided that I wanted to be a corporate pilot, most likely, as uh, that I would make trains a hobby and that flying would be how I'd earn a living and as an adult. And so I built time until I went off to college and I picked an aeronautical engineering college, which included the aircraft and power plants mechanics license as part of it because I figured I'd want to own some airplanes and I probably wouldn't be rich. So if I could do some of my own maintenance, that might help. Anyway,
So did you ever own an airplane yourself?
yeah, so I was lucky enough to own two different airplanes. Um, one thing I learned from starting at 12, now I had a son and a daughter, son first and then a daughter, and they're both very very smart kids. And my son was interested in learning to fly, but I didn't start until he was 15 because when I he didn't need the help as far as academically to get him motivated. I mean, he never got anything but an A in his life. I mean, he graduated valedictorian from high school, top of his class and cadet of the year at college, top of his class for his master's degree at the Air Force Institute of Technology down here, right, Pat. I don't know how you get an A in gym, but anyway, so I started
Wow.
him learning to fly in 16, and he did the same thing. He sold on his 16th birthday and got his privates on his 17th birthday, but that was in our airplane, which I owned at the time with two other families. A lot of times you don't use the airplane every day, so
Yeah.
sometimes it's convenient to have a couple of families that you really trust and share the cost of an airplane together. So I had a Grumman Tiger, which was a nice four-place airplane, was simple enough to train my children how to fly in, yet fast enough to actually go places, uh, as a family with.
Yeah. Yeah. And what were some of those places you would go to with your family?
Well, like my daughter and I, we at the time for Aero Corporation, we lived up in Bryan, Ohio, which is in the northwest corner. And so one fun place, the Grumman Tiger had a back seat that was a little like uh, a station wagon. You could fold it down, and now you had a bigger area. We would once in a while throw our bicycles in there, and then my daughter and I, we'd fly out to the Erie Islands, like Put-in Bay or something, and in the summertime, and then get our bikes out and just ride around on the island for the day, and then go over to the next island and ride around, that kind
Oh,
of thing. We would go to Chicago for lunch. We would go to some places in Ohio for lunch, stuff like that.
no, wait, I can't. No, I can't even imagine. We'll go to Chicago for lunch. This is
The the
this is really amazing, Larry.
so we did stuff like that. The longest trip we made in that airplane that we owned was uh, my wife's from Arizona. I met her when I was in the military out there, and we'd been back several times, but we had never been back for like Thanksgiving. And and when I bought the airplane, she said, "Well, why don't could we go out there for Thanksgiving?" And I said, "Well, this is a smaller airplane. Depends a little bit on the weather window, but we could. But it's going to take 2 days to get out there, basically, in the airplane. And so that was about the longest trip we ever made. All four of us, is we flew to Arizona for Thanksgiving one year and turned around, and Virgil, that was when he was 15 and just learning to fly. So, I let him fly every other leg, and it was a good experience for him. And it wasn't the easiest trip. Matter of fact, we had quite a headwind starting, and it was snowing out, and we took off from Bryan, and our first stop for fuel was St. Louis, and we landed there. And like I said, we had a pretty good headwind, and I told my wife, I said, this would be a good place for us to go Christmas shopping and then just turn around tomorrow morning and go home. And she said, you promised we were going to Arizona. So we did.
That's great. So you mentioned that you knew you were going to fly corporate, that's what you wanted to do. Why corporate versus like the passenger airline?
Well, there was a couple of driving factors in that. When I was in high school, you couldn't get into military flying unless you had 20/20 vision without glasses. And some of the airlines had that same system. And that was mainly to keep their amount of resumes down, because
Oh,
the FAA's rule was as long as your vision was correctable to 20/20, you could be a commercial pilot or an airline transport pilot. So that was one thing that made me think more about corporate aviation. And the other thing is, I like people. And, in airline flying, especially today, the doors shut and locked and all this kind of stuff. But when you're a corporate pilot, you get to know the people you fly and their children, and there becomes a certain family there. So that was some of the reasons I decided that to probably go the corporate route.
yeah. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. That's so interesting.
I wore glasses since in second grade. My mom says I told the teacher that she should write better on the chalkboard. And shortly after that, I had glasses.
Well, I've had glasses since I was in the first grade. It was I didn't say anything to the teacher, who was a Catholic nun, but she noticed that I couldn't read the chalkboard from the back of the class. So I ended up with my first pair of glasses. Yeah, so I understand a lifetime of nearsightedness. But well, so what are a couple of the interesting experience you've had as a jet pilot? If you had a couple of stories to tell, which ones would they be?
Sure. Well, a Learjet was a wonderful airplane, and back in the 80s and stuff, it was one of the few corporate jets that actually flew above 41,000 feet. We could get to 45,000 feet, which, except for a few military airplanes and Grumman Gulfstreams, nobody else flew up there. And there's lots of interesting stories, but let me think for a second. One thing that was really cool is a lot of times we could actually cross over the top of thunderstorms. And when there's a cold front or something, and like you're in Tennessee or something in the summertime, a lot of time there's a squall line, there's a line of storms all the way from Toronto to Houston. And you don't, unless you're looking at a weather map, you don't realize that. But a lot of times there's just a string of storms, almost like a wall. And there's usually a few breaks. And the airlines, they're down in the 30s, thousands to high 30s. And so, and most of the corporate and the turboprops, you've got to find a hole with your radar or go through a weak spot, because you don't want to go through a thunderstorm, because the updrafts and downdrafts are so bad that you may lose control of the airplane. But with the Learjet, especially if you were en route, usually you could climb above the tops of the thunderstorms. Oh. And one night coming back from Teterboro, New Jersey, years and years ago, and this was in the early days of the space shuttle. Shortly after takeoff from Teterboro, and I'm in the clouds, and you couldn't see a bolt of lightning, but you could see once in a while a flash, and you say, there's nothing on the radar. And that was before we had all this cell phones and everything else that showed uh, radar from all these ground facilities. In those days, you had to use your airborne radar to see the thunderstorms and stuff. And anyway, even when I got out of the top of the clouds, um, there were no storms close. But what it really ended up being is there was a strong line of storms from Toronto to down into the Ozarks somewhere. And so up ahead about Cleveland, there was this line of thunderstorms. And it was a dark night, no moon or anything. So I climbed to 43,000 feet, hoping that would get me a few thousand feet above the tops. And that way I wouldn't have to deviate a whole lot, could go across the top and then descend on the other side into the destination. Well, just as I'm over the tops of the thunderstorms, and like I said, it's a dark night, beautiful night. And the light show when you're up there is just fantastic, looking at the lightning. When you see it on the ground, you just see a little bit. When it goes off and there's a line of thunderstorms, it's almost like it sets off a detonation for hundreds and hundreds of miles. Cloud to cloud lightning. Just it's the best light show on earth. But anyway, so I'm crossing the thunderstorms. All of a sudden, this bolt of lightning came out of the top of the storm and went right by me on the left side up into space. And about a couple of seconds later, one on the right side came up and went past us and went up into space. And it's clear up above us. And I'm said to the co-pilot, I said, man, they're shooting at us. And so I told a couple of people on the ground about it, and nobody believed me. Well, about a year later, they had video from the space shuttle. They had finally discovered that lightning actually does shoot up into space a certain distance from the top of real big thunderstorms, and they never knew that. And they call it sprites now, usually. And now there's even some cameras up on Pikes Peak and so that look east because it's high enough that that thunderstorms a few hundred miles away to the east and in the Midwest, they can see the lightning going out of the top, and they're studying it and stuff. So that was a really neat thing that that nobody. I mean, I'm sure there was some Air Force guys who had discovered and seen that before too, and maybe some other people that flew Learjets. But that was a surprise to me. So that was kind of fun.
Yeah, yeah, and the lightning that goes up from the thunderstorms, those are called sprites. Is that what you said?
Sprites, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
So, and let's see. Do you want one other story?
Yeah,
Story is
please.
that another one is this was just kind of fun. So it's amazing where you can go in a jet airplane in a day, and the usual person really that just gets on an airline or they probably wouldn't think of that. But anyway, my next door neighbor, again at Bryant, my next door neighbor worked in the aero factory, and I was, of course, one of the pilots. And one summer morning, we came out of our houses and waved at each other, and I got in my car and drove to the airport about 7 a.m, and he went to work. Well, the vice president needed to be dropped off in San Francisco that day. So I went to work, and by 8 o'clock in the morning, I took off in the Lear along with my first officer, and we took the vice president to San Francisco International and dropped him off. So that's about a 4-hour trip, depending on the wind. Refueled, had lunch, and then turned around and came back empty. Which usually when we'd go all the way to the West Coast, we wouldn't turn right around and come back. Usually you were there a couple of days because of meetings or things. So even one air traffic controller in Colorado said, oh, quick trip, huh? Because he was working us going out and now coming back. But anyway, so got back, landed about, so it was probably close to 5 o'clock at night, landed, put the airplane away, got in my car, drove home. Just a little town, not very far. And as I got out of my car in the driveway, my neighbor was mowing his lawn. He saw me and he shut his mower off. And now it's about 5:20 in the afternoon. And He said, well, where'd you go today, Larry? And I said, I went to San Francisco for lunch. And he said, you liar. And I said, well, don't ask then. You know,
That's just incredible.
yeah.
Well, Larry, how has air travel changed, would you say, since you started?
The big change is when I was young, uh, it was actually way more expensive today. Uh, I mean, because of inflation, maybe the amounts seem similar, but uh, in those days, I'll bet there less than 10% of the people who lived in the US probably had never ridden on a commercial airliner. Vacations, I think, at least in my family, vacations didn't mean going to Disneyland or something. It meant going to see relatives that lived within a state or two away. Or again, because we lived close to Canada, maybe going to Canada to fish. But other than that, um, so but because of deregulation and the price has really come down. Uh, so most of us common people can afford to, you know, fly to Florida or go out to Denver or go someplace you want, or even go to Europe. And I think when I was young, that was pretty unheard of for the general population. Not, of course, for the wealthy people, but for the.
Yeah, yeah. And so, do you ever fly anywhere on a commercial airline these days?
Oh yeah, up until a couple of years ago, I had use of a very nice Beechcraft Bonanza for my own personal use, which was somebody else's, but uh, it was actually the chairman of Hartzell Propeller's personal airplane, not his corporate airplanes, but personal airplane. So uh, I had some use of that, and uh, so I would still use that quite a bit. But if we were going some distance, like all the way out to see my wife's side of the family or something in Arizona or something, then we would. Now, when I was flying corporate, usually we would combine that with a corporate trip that happened to be going the same direction.
Hmm.
So we were pretty spoiled because we weren't used to really riding on airliners, And but yeah, occasionally now we'll. Our last trip, I suppose, was to Arizona a few years ago. I'll go to see my sister down in Florida. I go to France occasionally because we had an exchange student that we became so close to that she came back several times. We've been to her house. Now she's an adult with a husband and children. We've been to her place a few times in France, and I so stuff like that.
Yeah.
Although one time early on, she and I played roller reversal. I flew airlines to France. And then again, I love to ride on the trains. So I had to go to Tarbes, which is in the southern France, close to Lourdes, to pick up a brand new Cicada TBM airplane that was going to be one of Hartzell's airplanes. And I invited her to ride the TGV train down there from Paris instead of airlining down. And so we played role reversal. She met me at customs and then showed me a little bit of Paris for 2 days. Then we took the fast train to Lourdes, and then 2 days later, I flew her back and dropped her off at Le Bourget in Paris before I flew the airplane back across home.
That
So
that's amazing. And so when you fly yourself as a passenger, when you're a passenger, um, what goes through your head and what advice would you have for other passengers who may have never flown, not as passengers, but may have never flown as pilots? They don't have the knowledge that you have as a pilot. What,
uh,
us common people, what advice would you have for us when we're in a plane, maybe when it hits turbulence or that kind of thing?
okay. So that's a very good question. And what I used to tell because I would occasionally get some passengers corporately that say, I'm afraid to fly and stuff.
Hmm.
And I would say, look, I want to go home tonight. Now, I don't know you very well, but as far as I'm concerned, I'm coming home tonight. And so as long as you just follow me, you're going to be okay. And I've been flying since I was 12 years old. And that usually worked pretty well. As far as the turbulence, I, I would try to make people understand that air is a fluid, just like water. So if you ever stood along a mountain stream or something, the water is flowing around rocks and all kinds of stuff, and air is a little like that, even though there's not rocks up there. Well, unless you get too low and you're over in the Rocky Mountains or something. But so when you hit turbulence, it's just like I said, just think you're going down a dirt road at 100 miles an hour. It's unless the guy's made the mistake of flying into a thunderstorm or something, the airplanes are designed for certain speeds and turbulence. So unless it's just horrible, like in a real bad thunderstorm or something, you're probably just you're going to get the ride of your life, but you're going to probably be fine. The chairman of Hartzell, that owned the company, Jim Brown, and Connie, his wife, were really, and he was a former Navy carrier pilot. But anyway, early on in my career with them, I was flying her somewhere, and I don't remember this instance, but we were in some pretty good turbulence, and she was sitting up front in the co-pilot seat, and she said she started screaming, and I finally said, "Shut up. You're going to be okay." Now, I can't believe I said that to the chairman's wife, but she swears that I did. But she said later, she said, "You were right, though. I was distracting you. I was sitting over there screaming." So, yeah, some fun experiences.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, what did you love most about flying, about your career as a pilot?
Well, one thing I really loved about corporate flying was uh, every day could be different. I mean, when you fly for the airlines, you usually get a set route and you fly that pretty much until you just bid on another route or something. But with corporate flying, one day, you're just going maybe to Nashville, and the next day you're going to Teterboro, New Jersey, or then the next day you're going to Detroit Metro, and the next day you're going to San Francisco, and the next day you're going to JFK to pick somebody up off the airlines or drop them off to take an international flight. I'm the kind of person that gets bored real easy. And so, and I'm not saying you didn't always fly every day either, because there was paperwork to do and maintenance and different things too. But that's what I loved, is that I got a lot of different places. And I'll kind of jokingly say, I know a little bit within 3 miles of every airport in the U.S. I know about.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a
I mean,
good, that's a good point. Did you have
and,
any favorite cities, any favorite airports?
um, Meigs, when it still existed, was an airport on the lake shore at Chicago,
Ah,
which was right tucked up right against the city. And I loved that because you'd land in there and you could walk downtown in 15 minutes.
wow. Wow.
And so if we were there for the day, and the Aero did a lot of banking and stuff like that there, so we went there often. If you went to Midway or O'Hare, you're out. And if you wanted to go downtown, you had to get on a train or something to do it.
Yeah.
But Meigs was a blast. Plus, it was only 4,000 feet long, which was fairly short. Matter of fact, I had one of the members in the Lear. That was there in Hilton Head Island were the shortest places we went with the Learjet. And I had a board of director behind me one time going into Meigs. And after we landed and we were getting out, he says, "Larry," he says, he says, "when we were 2 miles out on final," he said, "I thought there is no way in H we're going to land and stop on that runway and without going in the water." And he said, he says, "I don't know what we're paying you, but it's not enough." Yeah, yeah. Well, tell the president
Right.
that.
So,
Another beautiful airport is Burke Lakefront up in Cleveland, is right on the the lake. And there's just something about them when they're right on the lake. It's kind of neat. And there's lots of other airports that. One of the things corporate flying is you get to know. They call them FBOs, fixed base operators. That's like where you're going to park at the different airports. And bigger airports usually have two or three of them, so you have a selection. But you usually pick out who you like, maybe best gas prices or lobbies or one thing or another. And those people get to know you too. And so they know who you are every time you come in, and that's kind of nice.
And this might sound like an off-the-wall question, but it affects a lot of people. So, a lot of people, myself included, may have trouble with their ears or their sinuses with the constant changes in air pressure if they fly a lot. So, as a pilot, you float all the time. Did that affect you at all?
No, it didn't affect me at all unless I had a cold or something. And as a pilot, you're only allowed to get colds on holidays and stuff. You're not,
Right.
so there, but there's a secret, and I'm trying to think of the Guy Fennison. You heard of Guy Fennison? You know,
Oh, guaifenesin. Okay, yes,
yeah.
this medication. I'll
Okay,
actually put
yes,
it in the
you're the
show notes.
doctor.
Yeah.
You would pronounce it
Mhm.
correctly. So to me, it used to be in cough syrup and stuff like that.
Yes, yes, it's in Robitussin.
Yes, well, it's hard to find it by itself today, but
Yes.
if you can find it by itself, or you can get it in tablet form by itself,
Hmm.
it makes your mucus runny. So if you have trouble with your stationary tubes from flying, of course, see, it's not so bad when you're going up. When the airplane climbs, the air is coming out of the air pressure that was in your inner ear is coming out. So it's pushing out. But what happens if you've got a cold or something, when you come back down, now the air is pushing back in. And that's when it pushes mucus and stuff in there. So, yeah, I, in my backpack that I carried corporate flying, I had a little medicine chest because people either needed aspirin or they needed ibuprofen or they needed guaifenesin or other things. And so, but I would recommend that if you have trouble with your ears, it's not so important on the takeoff, but when you get on an airliner and go someplace, a half an hour or so before you're going to start the descent to landing is take a guaifenesin, whether it's a tablet or liquid, and chances are you won't have any problem. If you do, uh, have you heard of the Valsalva method?
Yes, the Valsalva maneuver, of
Yeah,
course. I'm a
yeah, and you don't
cardiologist.
really want to do that if you can have, because that's going to push mucus up.
So that's, for instance, you're breathing against a closed glottis, which means, practically speaking, you hold your nose and you breathe against it, and
Yeah, right,
you
exactly,
pop your ears open. Okay.
right, yeah, which and I mean, even I remember one time, well, that trip in our Grumman Tiger to Arizona, the Thanksgiving morning, and we're going to land at Falcon Field out there in Mesa. But the trouble is, there's a 12,000-foot mountain just before you get there. So, and Mesa's at about, I don't know, let's say 800 feet, 600 feet above sea level. So I come across this mountain, and then I started this really steep descent. And of course, in a little airplane, it's not pressurized either. So where our ears are up at 12,000 or 14,000 feet.
Oh.
So at about 4,000 feet, my daughter in the back taps me on the shoulder and says, "You got to level off because my ears are stuck." No. So I had to fly around a little bit to give her a chance for her ears to come down. That was for, yeah, and I don't know if we hadn't thought of having her take guaifenesin that day. Well, normally she didn't have trouble. Maybe that was it. But anyway.
But so you were saying that you don't want to do that maneuver where you hold your nose and pop your
Oh
ears.
well, it's okay. It does pop your nose, but you're going to force a little more of that mucus. That's the problem. A little further up your stationary too. That's all. It's probably not going to be a problem. But I'm just saying, uh,
If you have a cold, that might not be the best thing to do.
it might not be the best thing to do. And guaifenesin works pretty well. At least everybody that had trouble that flew with me, and I said, "You start doing this," and then they never complained after that anyway. So
That is so helpful. So, listeners, this is not medical advice, but I am going to spell. We say some people call it guaifenesin, some people call it guaifenesin. I'm going to spell it for you in case you want to look it up. Okay, Guaifenesin. And Larry, you're saying it has worked for you, and your passenger is taking it half an hour before landing.
yeah,
Yeah,
half an hour.
or before
Well,
descent.
they start down about 20 minutes out. So I would half an hour before you think the airplane's going to start down. So that might stretch it out to an hour.
Might be an hour or 50 minutes before landing.
Yes,
And on a
that
short flight like Nashville to Atlanta, you almost want to take it right as soon as you
that's right.
get in the air.
Asheville to Atlanta is like boom, boom.
Yeah.
It's like a
Yeah.
tra- yeah,
That's really helpful. Again, folks, as a physician, I have to tell you, check with your own physician to see whether or not that medication is safe for you. But I've given you the a way to look it up now. So,
yeah, and it is over the counter.
and it is over the counter. So there you go. Um, okay, Larry, I know you shared with me a very beautiful poem that your daughter wrote about about her father as a pilot, basically. Do you happen to have that? And would you mind reading it for us?
Yeah, I have it close by. Yeah, no, I'll read it.
Be sure to read the title too.
Okay. Well, I'm going to preface a little then. So, of course, my kids got dragged around in airplanes, and when we went most distances, they either got to ride in corporate airplanes or we owned an airplane. And so my daughter, and there was a lot of other interests that I had, and I took my kids on lots of trips. I also took them out to watch thunderstorms at night and look at the stars and other things that I was interested in that I thought they should be interested in. Uh, so my adult daughter wrote this poem for me several years ago for my birthday, and it really kind of talks about her as a young child, her impressions of riding around in the airplane with dad, and then me dragging her out in the middle of the night to either look at the sky or to look at thunderstorms, and then kind of her feelings of our relationship, I guess. So yeah, I'd be glad to read that. Let's see if I can. So she titled it "My Father's Sky." An airplane's engine hums as it cools down, preparing to sleep. Adventures in faraway lands absorbed into its frame. Stories for the pilots, for my dad to share. Runway lights off. Crisp air transforms our breath into rose-sharp ink blots under a crystal night sky, my father's sky, lit by uncountable pinpricks of light, given names and form, thereby made familiar, welcomed as comrades, Ursula Majors, or the Guardians, Orion. Fanciful stories recreated, enlarged by a child's prolific imagination. An anchor, no matter how cold the night becomes, no matter how isolated I feel. Comforting, secure, immutable, my soul embraces the silence, fumbles with the patience, peaceful melody, foreign to my nature, but exceedingly welcome. Another day, a warm wind caresses my cheek, toys with my hair like a shy lover, awkward but determined, laced with the promise of coming rain. In the distance, flashes of light illuminate the night, choked by a percussive symphony rebounding across the clouds. As the sky opens, we retreat for dry shelter. Vibrant, energized, my soul sings, echoing the refrain. These memories and more under my father's sky. Do not fear distance. The bond we share does not change based on proximity. Do not fear the darkness. It is not absolute. Do not fear the storms life brings. Their beauty, their precious power in, to shape and renew us. Because of them, we are made strong. Home, the warmth, the happiness, the love is not a location. Home is the core, unbreakable, unshakable, connecting our hearts across the all-encompassing sky, my Father's sky. Thank you, dearest Father. I love you. Kathy Zamora.
Oh, that is so beautiful. Thank you, Larry, for sharing it with listeners, and thank you to your daughter for giving you permission to do so.
You're welcome. Yeah. Yeah, that was probably the nicest birthday gift she ever sent me. So
Oh yeah, I could see why. That's a beautiful poem and clearly came straight from the heart. Wow, so let's talk now about another part of your life that is very interesting, I think, and really how we connected at first, which was through trains, your interest in trains. And you have a very keen interest in trains. And in fact, why don't you tell people what the backdrop is behind you? And because it looks like you're inside the Eiffel Tower, but that's not what it is at all. So tell them
no,
the story. Tell them what you told me.
okay, that is the Kinzu Railroad Bridge, and people can Google it. The Kinzu Railroad Bridge,
Spell Kinzu for us.
Kinzu.
Okay,
I'm not a great speller.
that'll give us a way to search, but it starts with a K, Kinzu. Okay.
Yeah, and it's in western Pennsylvania,
Okay.
northwestern Pennsylvania. Uh, yeah, that was a structure built in the 1880s of cast iron, uh, about probably 3/4 of a mile across the valley south of Bradford, Pennsylvania, for the B&O Railroad and the Erie Railroad. I think both used it. Was rebuilt out of steel in the early 1900s. And then maybe 20 years ago or so, a tornado took part of it down. They turned it into a state park, and the remnants of it is still standing. And you can walk out on it, way out on it, and look in this beautiful forested valley up and down there. And there's a stream way down below, like 300 feet or so way down below. And there's paths you can you walk down into the valley if you've got the oomph to walk back up and all that kind of stuff. So that's the brief history of that. Uh,
Gotcha.
that bridge saved about 8 miles of going way around, staying on top of the ridge line. So
Right, right. So, sort of that's symbolic of your interest in trains. And I think it's really appropriate for this podcast episode because I want to I want to talk to you more about that. You said you were interested in trains and planes as a young boy, and you chose planes as a career. So why were you interested in trains too? Who got you interested in that, or how did that start? Let's start. Let's
okay, well,
begin
there's
there.
no question. I have my dad was the local photographer, so
Okay.
in our town. So there were lots of pictures in our home. And I have pictures of my dad and my mom and I laying on the living room floor with a little circle train. Actually, the track's hooked to a battery, not a power pack, but a battery. And I'm probably about 1 year old.
Oh, okay.
And then they built, I don't know how my dad talked my mom into it, but when I was a little bit older, they got American Flyer train, which was called S gauge, and built a layout in our dining room of this little house we lived in, and we ate in the kitchen. But we had a train layout in the dining room, S gauge. And I even remember when I was about 5 or so, I came down that Christmas, and my mom had used plaster or something, and all of a sudden it was a winter scene. It was, the layout was now it had snow on it. It wasn't real snow, but
Yeah.
anyway. And then my sister came along. I liked girls. I wanted a sister with long hair. they tried to give me one for Christmas, and they only missed by about 5 days.
Aw.
And but then we needed a bigger house. So we moved around the block to a 3-story house that I got the attic as the bedroom. So now I had room, the floor space, to have a train layout of my own. And my dad, I worked in his business since I was probably in a playpen. So I had some allowance. And by third grade, I saw that HO gauge scale was more affordable than S gauge and more realistic. So I started buying HO stuff, and uh, and between then and getting out of high school, I probably built one, two. I'm looking on my wall. I have pictures. 1, 2, 3, 4 different layouts.
Oh,
Each a
wow.
little more, you know, progressive. So not only that, model railroading. My dad would take me down to the local train yard, and in those days we were on the Erie to Philadelphia main line, which was only a couple passenger trains a day, but a lot of freight. There's a refinery in our town, a lot of steel stuff. So, and again, since legal things weren't, trespassing wasn't such a big thing in those days because I guess people didn't sue. So, if you walked out on a train yard, people weren't chasing you off and stuff.
Yeah.
So my dad would take me down to the train yard quite often because he probably didn't like trains like I did, but he was used to riding on them. But he knew I did, and so that that's what got it all started. And I have a picture. It's upstairs. So in the early 50s, most color pictures were actually black and white pictures that were oil paintings on top of the black and white. And one of the local engineers was going to lose his Pennsylvania steam engine to a diesel. They were going to replace it. He was going to have a diesel. And he commissioned my dad to take a portrait of him in his steam engine. And we went down, and my mom went with me. And anyway, I have this oil painting that's actually a black and white picture underneath of it of my mom, and I'm 3 years old. My mom and I are standing by the steps at the bottom where you would climb up into the cab. The engineer, he's leaning against a big wrecker, 250-ton wrecker that's parked next to his steam engine. And my dad took the picture. And so I have the one original, and if the engineer or his family, I'm sure he's long passed away now, has the other. And then it may be my very first earliest memory that I really remember is after the picture, we all climbed up in the cab, and he gave us a little ride. I don't remember that, but he opened the fire door, and I know my eyes just about popped out. And he helped me pull the whistle. I didn't weigh enough to actually pull the whistle, but
Aw.
and so that's how probably my interest in trains got started.
Wow. Wow. And now I happen to know that you take trips to go train watching. Tell us
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah. So, of course, I went away to college, and I did some train watching out in the St. Louis area in college, and I did kind of left model railroading behind for the time. You're moving around, and then in the Air Force. But I liked riding on trains and going watching trains, and so I kept that up a little bit through those years. And then, well, I should say I have a male defect gene. I don't have a sports bone in my body. So, so I was never interested in sports, maybe because I was always the last kid picked in the old days when you had the neighborhood and the two big guys picked who was on whose team. I was always the last one picked. Maybe that was it. But anyway, so never been really interested in sports. Um, but trains always fascinated me. So I would go watch trains, and I thought, I wouldn't go by an interstate and watch trucks.
Right.
Why do I
Yeah.
like to go watch trains? And it's something about their size, and they make the earth shake, and of course, the amount of freight that they move for all of us across the country, and of course, before airplanes were really a thing, that's how everybody got around,
Yeah.
and so, and then when we lived up in Bryan, Ohio, at Arrow, the original New York Central main line from New York City to Chicago runs right across the north end of the town. So and of course, it's Norfolk Southern now there, but it's very busy main line. So even as that, I was there as a corporate pilot. When I wanted to get away from the kids, or a lot of times I drug them along, wanted to get out of the house for the evening, we just go up to the train tracks and watch the trains for a while. And I kind of taught my daughter and my son to enjoy that too. And it doesn't cost anything. Oh yeah, I suppose you got to go to the Dairy Queen, a few things like that, but you're not buying a sports ticket or anything, And so it's it's just so I've just always really enjoyed doing that, and it's relatively inexpensive,
Yeah.
and I've tried to be safe and around them. And when I came to Hartselle again, when we were in Piqua or in Bryan raising our children, you're in all kinds of different organizations, so you make friends across the community, and besides maybe your church. But when we came here, our kids were both off to college, and I like to say we moved while they were in college, but they still found us. And uh, but here we weren't doing so much with the community because the kids were gone,
Mhm.
and I was so busy flying it didn't matter. But so man, I needed somebody to go watch trains with me. So uh, one of the fellows that I flew a lot because he was one of the Hartselle's uh, salespersons and a very technical person named Steve. He and I were all over the country, places I had to take him for different calls and different things, and also maybe to fix a problem here and there. And so he got dragged around watching a few trains, and all of a sudden he decided, here's a guy that's 20 years younger than I am, or so. And so now I got this sidekick that wants to go watch trains with me. And if you've seen him, he's been, you've seen pictures of him. We already have a May weekend scheduled in Bryan, Ohio, and a September weekend scheduled. He's so busy because he still works and everything that I can go when I want, more or less. But
No,
we've already scheduled.
that is really great to have that to look forward to, though. It's already on your schedule.
Yeah, it is. It is.
But
He's already, since it's been warm the last few days, he's already texted me a couple of times. And another friend, I have several, of course, a lot of friends left in Bryan that like to come out. And at first, I thought Steve would get upset because there's just this menagerie of people who come see me when I'm in Bryan, because I was up there
yeah.
for 19 years at the train tracks. But he enjoys most of them. And one of them just texted me today to tell me they're building a new Amtrak station there, and he sent some
Okay.
pictures.
Oh,
And
wow.
anyway, so but I just enjoy that. And now that I'm retired, we have a small motor home, and that is good for a lot of things. But it's just Steve and I really enjoy it because now instead of staying in a motel late at night when we're really tired, then we move across the tracks, across the road. So at least we're not right by the tracks if something happened.
Yeah.
And of course, that's in Trains Magazine. They had a 1 or 2 page excerpt of your walk through fire.
I actually wrote that article for
Did
Trains
you? Okay,
Magazine.
yeah.
Yeah,
And,
that's right. That's where you first found out
and
about
I
my
read
position.
that and I thought, I don't know who this lady is, but I'm always mindful of the safety, and it looks like an interesting story, and maybe I can learn something. So lo and behold,
Oh,
you
you
know,
have my book. Yes, Walk Through Fire. Oh,
I bought your book and I read it, and then I must have seen you on the internet, or I have this habit of watching a lot of YouTube because that's about my attention span, is 15, 20 minutes,
yeah,
That's about
that's a lot longer than most people's these days. So,
so anyway, so that's when I decided that I think that I wrote you the first time and said, there was some was a great book. Plus, there was a lot of interesting pointers of from the safety aspect and everything.
Yeah, yeah, you want to stay safe.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, thank you, Larry. I think we've come full circle here in our conversation. That's a It's just been great talking with you. And before we get to our final question, I want to ask, is there anything else you'd like to add? Anything else you want listeners to know?
Um, you know, I've had a wonderful life. Uh, I've had some almost tragedies, but they didn't turn out being tragedies. And I guess what I want to say, I don't know if many youth watch your podcasts or programs, but when you're young, try a few different things. Figure out what your passion is. Now, but it's and what you might want to do for a living. But it's also got to pay you well enough because it's not cheap to live today. So you got to figure out something that's going to pay enough, but still you have a passion for. Thankfully, I had a job that most of the days I couldn't wait to get up in the morning and go off in and look down at the earth, at God's creation, the beauty, not only below, but pilots get to see the weather from above and through it and stuff, there's a lot of beauty to that too, and so I've been very blessed that way. And I know I've had friends that couldn't wait till they retired or hated their job. And I had different jobs growing up and in between some the flying, but I always tried to say, I'm going to do the best job I can with whatever it is. Try and make this fun. And anyway, so I guess that's if I had anything to say is, try and find something that you love because then it's not work.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that is so, so, so true.
I mean, there is once in a while you'll get up in the morning and say, "Why do I love flying so much?" But most of the time it's great. We all have those moments, I'm sure. Yeah.
Well, and this is why I love talking to people like you, people who have found their passion and their work to be the same thing. It's rarer than we would like, and so I think that's a wonderful thing that you had that for your career. Now, Larry, you know that the motto of Positive Vibes is keep on the sunny side. So,
Right.
so how do you keep on the sunny side?
Well, first of all, I had wonderful parents and a matriarchal grandfather that lived with me, and I've always been a pretty positive person. I think I got that from watching them. And I mean, I've done things in my life that I wasn't that happy about doing, maybe work wise and stuff, but I've always been pretty positive and just try and make the best out of what it is you have to do. Um, I've had 52 years of marriage. Great. I mean, sure, we all have to at least we have to work at our marriage, but still, that's been wonderful, and she's been wonderful support to all the things that I have wanted to do, and had two wonderful children that are very successful, and proud of them, and and then I've been blessed that I've had this gift, I guess I'd call it, is I seem to be able to not only make friends quickly, but they become good friends and they become lifelong friends.
Wow.
And when we all sometimes are probably, I'm speaking of me anyway, once in a while you're down or depressed or something, besides the other stuff, there's nothing like going out to lunch with a good friend or getting a phone call from somebody that I went to college with. That's been 50 some years ago, but we're still like that, even though they live in the West and I live in the East. And out of the blue, you get calls from longtime friends, and the aviation community is a small community too. So there's some fact for that too. So there's a lot of things that keep me on the sunny side, and I think, and then in the end, I can always, if I need to, and I do sometimes, or want to anyway, is remember my creator, that I'm a child of God, and he put me down here, and there must be a reason, and that reason probably entails helping other people somehow, some way. And trying to be positive is easier when you're trying to do that kind of stuff than not. So, uh, and so I have the faith there, I guess you might say.
Oh, you could just about write the manual for positive vibes, Larry. You just hit about every single one of the major pillars. That's fantastic. Thank you so, so much for being on the show and for sharing your story with us. And really, really appreciate it.
Well, it's great to talk to you in person, and I enjoy watching your the podcasts and stuff, and I've learned a little bit, and the last couple have been pretty interesting. It,
We have a lot of different guests on this
right,
podcast, so
right.
I, I have had a lot of fun with it and plan to keep going. So people like you are a huge help. So thank you again.
You're welcome. You're welcome, and thanks for your time.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Positive Vibes on the Sunny Side. If you'd like to support Positive Vibes, you can go to buymeacoffee.com/ on the sunny side. That's BUY me, ME, a coffee.com/ on the sunny side. And the link will be in the show notes. Any amount you choose will help this podcast moving forward, and it's so appreciated. And also, please, please tell others, your friends and family, about the podcast and hit subscribe or follow for this podcast on whichever platform you like to listen to and use for your podcasts. Or if you're on the YouTube channel, please subscribe to the channel so you won't miss an episode going forward. That will also help others discover this podcast, because the more followers and subscribers a podcast has, the more the platform shows it to other people who might not have discovered it otherwise. So I really appreciate your help and your support. And this is Yasmine signing off until next time and reminding you to keep on the sunny side.